IPO is often seen as a defining milestone in a company's growth. On ground, it is one of the most rigorous tests of governance and compliance. Investors, merchant bankers, legal advisors, regulators don't just assess where a company is today. They examine how it got there. Decisions made years earlier suddenly matter. The challenge is that very few companies are built with an IPO in mind. Every successful Indian company begins with a founder solving a problem. Innovation often moves faster than regulation. When Ola and Uber launched before transport regulations were adapted to app-based aggregators, Zomato and Swiggy transformed food delivery before gig work entered the mainstream policy discussions. Fintech companies built newer lending models before dedicated regulations emerged. Quick commerce is now reshaping retail, even as governments continue to evaluate its regulatory implications. In those early years, founders are focused on survival, finding product market fit, raising capital, and acquiring customers. Governance rarely receives the same attention. Board processes, ESOPs, statutory record keeping, internal controls often evolve as company moves forward. For a while, that works. But governance compounds. Every board resolution, regulatory filing, shareholder decision becomes a part of company's institutional memory. What appears insignificant in the early years can become a major issue during IPOs and due diligence, which is why IPO readiness doesn't begin when a DRHP is drafted. It begins much earlier. That's what today's discussion is all about. How does compliance evolve as company grows? When should founders begin thinking differently about governance? And what separates companies that build governance as they scale from those forced into extensive cleanup exercises before listing? To help explore these questions, I'm delighted to be joined by Upasana Srivastav, Company Secretary, Compliance Officer, and Head Legal Affairs at No Paper Form Solutions Limited, also known as Merito. Over the years of her 15-year career, Upasana has worked extensively across corporate governance, legal affairs, and capital markets, including playing an important role in the IPO journeys of Indigo Airlines and iZigo. Having worked closely with founders, investors, board, and regulators across different stages of growth, she brings a unique perspective on what does it really take to build an organization that is not just a high growth, but also governance ready. Upasana, it's wonderful to have you today with us.
Thank you so much, Rishi. It's wonderful to be a part of this discussion.
Well, let's kick off the discussion today. Founders are experts in building products, raising capital, and scaling businesses. They are rarely trained in the matters of governance or regulatory compliance. From your experience, Upasana, what roles does the compliance officer play in helping founders understand these responsibilities, and how can compliance teams move beyond being seen as gatekeepers and become strategic partners in the company's growth journey?
As truly said, Rishi, founders are actually wired for building products, taking risks, raising capital, scaling their operations. But at the beginning, they always, feel that compliance is an administrative process only. So they really speak a different language than what compliance speaks. So for us, it is a role of a translator, I would say that let's not tell them the compliance as a work, but when we translate this compliance language into their language, like we talk about the risk associated with not complying with it, the trust which we'll gain from the market if we comply, if we are a good governed company, the valuation which we can get, the boost which we can get in the market. So these all things will help the founders understand what is the importance of governance and how it is just not an administrative function, but it is also a feature of integrated pipeline backbone in the company itself. So we should, instead of just spelling out words of governance in our legal language, should always behave like a translator and speak the compliance language of founders. And as a gatekeeper,
I believe money speaks the simplest language. So when they see that a well-governed company gets a better valuation or a better multiple, I am sure that it lands much better.
Yes. And they because they assess the risk for starting business. So a risk language is also what they want to hear. That if you tell them that if you not do this and what's gonna go wrong, then they understand it much better. So as you use the word gatekeeper, so a job of a gatekeeper is to say yes or no to someone entering. So instead of being a gatekeeper, if you want to be partners, what is a partner's role? To shape the whole deal in the boardroom, sitting with the management. So once we move from being a yes or no person, a roadblocker, a break, and start being the strategic partner in the deal decision making itself, that's where the compliance language speaks for itself and the founder understands. So a suggestion to the founder for us will be that treat us like a strategic partner. Ask us about the compliances beforehand to avoid any problems at the end of the deal. So instead of involving your compliance officer at the end of the deal and just ticking the box of compliance and a board meeting approval, sort of, if you make a strategic partners, you make the compliance officer your partner in the deal, then you will always shape a perfectly compliant deal that person will come with a solution based approach. So the day the founders start, calling us in the decision making team instead of a gatekeeper team, that will be the day that the growth journey of founders along with the startups will be delightful and painless, I would say.
Oh, very well said. And I'm a founder myself, so I've gone through this journey myself. One of the unique things about founders is they end up picking a problem which is irking a lot of people, which is a complex problem. And several people may have tried solving that problem before, but most of the founders, they end up solving it differently, solving it better, solving it cheaper, create more comfort, create a better value proposition. They are really disruptors in general.
True.
And when you are a disruptor, your innovative part of your brain functions much better than the administrative part of your brain, right? What has your experience been dealing with founders who started small? They were in survival mode in the early years. They were just trying to get by, make sure that the salaries can get paid, and most of them, equivalent of a garage in the Indian context, were operating out of those kinds of places. And then suddenly they stumble upon a good solution. They got lucky with some investor. The whole life cycle changed. The survival mode quickly shifted to a growth mode, and one thing led to the other, and more investors came and more money happened, and now there's a lot of money going around. How is this journey moving through, and what has been your experience talking to them about how in their life cycle the role of governance and compliance also needs to change besides business and investments?
So when we talk to these founders, or they talk to us about the work when they are big, so then we listen to these journeys of how they started from a room or a garage, and then how they cracked the problem and they became big. So the main thing we always hear from them is, especially in Indian scenario, is the compliance, which is killing them at a point when they started growing. So first they were operating from a room, they spoke to someone, they were doing their bit, they were developed the best tech or a product which they can. But when they wanted to hit the market and they needed the money, then that compliance hit them. Ki, okay, this is the bucket of things we need to do to complete our dream which we are thinking. So when they wanted to move from a garage to office, then it comes to their mind that labor law compliance is something they have to do. They have to take a SNE registration, they have to have a rent agreement in place. Then they want to hire a big team from 10 to 20 people to 100 and 1,000 people. And then they understand, oh my God, there's so many compliances coming to picture. And maybe they started from an LLP structure, what they say, or just a sole proprietorship structure, and they wanted to build a company, and they merely started from a name registration, and then how things escalated when they went to filings of registrar. And especially funding hits them hard when they start taking funds and they realize the due diligence checklist is such a big checklist, which is more than the code they developed maybe. So that's the story striking, and that's the thing we hear, that what important function is what people like us are living, that half of the creative people in the country and the real entrepreneurs are not even aware that to do a business, they need so much to be done at back end. And which is actually, they think as an administration function, but it's not an administrative function. It's the cost of doing business in India, and this is what will actually fulfill their dream of becoming a listed company and to be in the eyes of public and to especially get funds like bootstrap say to a funded to a public company. That's the journey of compliance. It hits them hard when they are aware about it.
Very well said. Let me ask you this. How many of the founders, in your view, they wake up to this reality and smell that morning coffee and pick this skill up? Because capability to pick up the skill is not a problem. It's the motivation to pick up the skill where the problem happens. What do you think?
I think every founder, apart from people like who are from a legal secretarial or background, it would be a 90% above figure if I can say that every founder is only focused on their product, and when they get up they get those ideas of making the service product, and even to the extent what customer I'll get, how I'll pitch in the market. They think about sales, they think about funding, but never ever, I would say maybe 99% never think about okay, this is the governance structure we also have to follow to fulfill our dream. So majorly that's a problem till now. But I think now the new founders, because of already so many founders are available in market to share their stories, and of social media also there's so many stories available, and founders are also writing books about their journey. So today's founder, which are very young organizations, are at least aware of the fact that the compliance should be in place. So I have seen like in this company also that the hiring of company secretary is from day one, which is a very big change from my 15-year careers when even the big companies were hiring only limited number of company secretaries, to the journey where now startups take company secretary or legal head in place from day one. That's a big change I have seen in the founder's journey and the startup journey.
No, excellent. It's very clear that more and more founders are banking on the peer ecosystem to share ideas. There are a lot more podcasters talking about some of these subjects. The stories get told more often, and so on and so forth. Now, in your experience, having worked with multiple founders over the years, I've often seen, the growth is happening. We would go ahead and start a new office and not realize that a whole bunch of things come up when a shops and establishment is created. You're hiring many people, but you don't realize that so many new compliances just became applicable. You just onboarded a few contractors, not realizing that there were items that needed to get done. And many of those things happen. In your experience, how does that story look like? What kind of non-compliances typically happen and you and your team ends up cleaning after them?
So generally what happens in this scenario is that the compliances which are not completed at the time of due diligence or something, or the first investor funding hitting, is mostly like labor law compliances or a simple board meeting which was done, but the description in the minutes was not captured properly. Or maybe there are here and there some loan given, loan taken, and nobody knew that it was an RPT. There was so much ESOP culture is coming to picture now, and ESOP grant was done, even the letter was given, but maybe it was not signed by the right person, or maybe scan copy is available but hard copy is not available. Such kind of stuff is very common in all the companies. It's rectifiable, but then the whole paper trail, maybe the person who was doing has left the company. So this kind of things always come in picture when due diligence starts. Due diligence is the stage where people start finding and digging out history of the company. Then you come to know that even if the work was done, there are lapses as per law, as per act, which has left. You may have taken a SNE registration, which is a very common thing because it's more applicable in Haryana. So maybe there's a small spelling mistake in your name. And when this paper goes to the lawyer, they are saying, oh, the company name or the address is not rightly defined. It's such a minute mistake, maybe done by some consultant. Or small laws like POSH. People have POSH committee in place. They have maybe a resolution also passed. The display is missing outside the office. A simple compliance. The nameplate. This is a very common problem in India.
Let's very interesting point you made around ESOPs. And most startup founders use ESOP as an instrument to attract and retain talent. I mean, that's a key way of building an organization with high quality talent without having to dig a hole in your pocket upfront when you're building the organization and the right team. Why don't you spend some time on what kind of typical non-compliances happen during the ESOP granting, documentation, management, administration, and related areas?
So So firstly, ESOP is always a manual work. The technology comes in picture very late stage when we are maybe listed. So the manual work is a human intervention. So maybe the Excel where you are maintaining that data, the data is not tallying. You granted something on a date after NRC meeting, so your grant date is not matching with the actual date of grant. You issued the grant letter in good faith. You forgot to affix the proper signatures, or to the extent that there are scan copies available, hard copy sign ही नहीं हुई कभी, मिल नहीं रही. So that kind of small mistakes when the things were done in good faith also, but then the documentation trail is missing. Or to the extent that someone was telling me, I can't name that company, that what the finance team was doing before that CS joined was they were taking bulk approvals for granting ESOP in one meeting and giving ESOP on whatever day they want, which is clearly a non-compliance. You have to give the name of the person, what amount you are granting, what is the vesting period. That kind of approval is required. But till the compliance officer joined, there was a bulk approval kind of a process of NRC कि इस साल के स्टार्टिंग में बोल दिया और पूरे साल अपने मन से ग्रांट कर रहे हैं. तो this kind of, and the thing is that auditors are also not taking this into account because they don't go into deep. They only see the ESOP expense part, so they don't see these small things in detail. So that and even the policy. So when you are trying to getting listed, then you check the policy is not in compliance with SEBI SBEB. The policies basically in startups are very lenient as per founder's wish, or there are 2-3 pager policy which will not capture things in detail. The definition of employee, grant, what will be the excise calculation price, this is not clearly mentioned. So these kind of small non-compliances come to bite at time of IPO journeys, where people are doing things in good faith, still they are missing the compliance part.
You mentioned about shops and establishment, right? When organization is growing and they are creating offices in multiple cities and locations, what kind of non-compliances typically end up coming there?
Firstly, they forget to take the registration only apart from the registered office. So mostly people don't take registration. Plus, because it's two state specific law, so like in Chennai, there's a specific registration of company tax apart from SNE. And it's only Chennai. So nobody sitting in Delhi would know this registration at all. So and that is given only when you apply for an SNE registration. So everything is linked. Apart from that, they may hire 10 and more people, they forgot to create a POSH committee at that point. They don't have the display, and all this labor law also says that you have to have a display of the company name. Companies Act also have this now. It's not written in regional language, or the whole board is missing from that place. And with the emerge of co-working space, it is more difficult now, because co-working you just have a seat. But labor law will not consider that. They want your whole display of the name. So such kind of small basic compliances, ESIS compliances, everything is missing from this part, the whole part. And before labor code, because it was so much difficult and a plethora of acts and laws and websites, tracking from the company side is also not very easy. And as you know, hiring a consultant for startup, it costs so much that they don't go into that until this sar pe aa jata hai tab tak. So that kind of labor law compliance is always present. SNE, ESI, company tax registration, POSH committees, if you are aware that in Haryana, as per POSH Act, there is no requirement of passing a board resolution to create a POSH committee. No one know where it is written. Only Haryana has a bylaw where they say you need a board resolution and you have to submit this to us. So company may be sitting in Mumbai opening an office here, they will not even know until they receive a notice from labor law office. So that kind of granule compliances are happening and the companies are not aware about it.
So labor clearly is a concurrent subject. The primary legislation is the union government. Subordinate legislation, which includes the rules, are state specific. Minimum wages vary. Payment of wages, payment of bonus items are different. Forms and formats are different. National festival holidays are different. A lot of these items are very state specific. Local language displays are required. Abstract of many acts need to be on your notice board. All of these are very labor specific compliances. Most of the founders who are very good at disruption and innovation they often miss out these items. So it's very important that when you are planning a geographical expansion and you're creating a new office space elsewhere, or you are even taking a few seats in a co-working space, avoid falling into those traps, because some of these will come and bite you in the back when you are either bringing a VC on your cap table or you're planning an IPO at some point in the future. So that brings Upasana to the next point. In a founder's journey, one of the mezzanine layer is to get a VC or a PE or the likes on the cap table. Mm-hmm. Tell us a little bit about what happens then. There are HNIs sometimes will come in as angels. There are some arrangements with them. Then you potentially are raising institutional capital, and capital is coming through VCs and PEs. Things change, their expectations change, the documentation, reporting, disclosures change. What kind of dynamics from a compliance and governance point of view falls through the crack in these kind of situations?
So once the company is not having, it's bootstrapped and not having a VC funding or institutional investor, so pretty much the board meetings are small. They are only compliance, basic compliance are done. The board discussions are also more on the product launch, the growth of the company, maybe business risk. And the compliance is just a 5-minute discussion maybe at the end of the meeting. But once a VC comes into picture, then we start doing this shareholders agreement, and then comes into the consent right, the information right, the reserve matter rights, and the documentation becomes heavy and more compliant to that matter. And then the founders also and the team realizes that, okay, this is our torch bearer, the compliance officer of torch bearer of governance. Now the board resolution does not mean that you say something, I hold a board meeting and pass the resolution. Now you have a reserve matter, you will check through it, you will ask the investor, you need the whole explanation to the investor, why do you want to pass this resolution? Then only you can hold a board meeting. The agenda becomes very detailed. The board minutes.
Let's dissect this a little more. You mentioned a few words. Many of my friends in the founder community may not be fully familiar with these words. So why don't you take a few minutes and explain the change of these dynamics, the key agreements that come in, and how they affect the day-to-day operations, governance, reporting requirements, disclosures, and so on and so forth. How does the dynamic of a board meeting change after that?
So the board meeting approvals are mostly in-house matter till the time investors are there. But when you have a shareholders agreement in place with the investors giving fund to you, then there are reserved matters clause in that agreement which says that if you want to do certain things, these 10 line items, you need my approval. Mostly an expansion of business.
Take a bunch of examples of what these reserved matters look like. Examples.
So any change in your accounting policy, any change in your charter documents, hiring of a company secretary, hiring of a CFO, giving out ESOP, getting more money in the cap table, even to the extent that expansion of a new business line, all these items are there. So before them, when you wanted to maybe launch a new product line, you can just take a board approval and do it. But now you have to explain to investors what is the product, what are risks we are seeking in it, how much capital we want to put in it, what the return we are expecting from that. That becomes now a whole discussion of a board meeting, and the board meeting, which was maybe running 30 minutes, will go 2 hours. So that's how this change happens. And then information, right? So even if you do a business and you don't need to inform anyone what are the minutes you created, what are your financial numbers. But now under information rights of the shareholder agreement, these shareholders have the right to receive financial statements from you, board minutes from you, how many ESOPs you have granted further, to whom you have granted further. So all these things, and even prior consent of doing certain items. So even if I talk about my experience also, so hiring me from a company secretary, a KMP hiring is also part of a reserve matter. So you think of a company who is shortlisting a profile basis their budget and the experience and profile they want. But now you have to go through that. You have to take the approval. The investor will also take the interview of that candidate now. So maybe you like the candidate, but the investor doesn't like them. So dynamics of the whole approval process change. And the reporting structure has to be very exhaustive, because now there is an external person who will ask you questions. So these things also impact when you want outside funding.
What about accounting and taxation matters? What about planning for a board meeting, documentation before and after, resolutions that go out, the seriousness around them, the accuracy of documentation embedded in them? What do you think?
that increased twofolds, because now the agenda is not an agenda anymore. Even before you plan the meeting and plan your agenda items, you have to take their consent. So now you have to document the agenda, what to say, like a big MNC or a big listed Indian company. They expect that level of compliance with you, and you are drafting it. Your financial statements may be a last minute matter and you are still changing the numbers on the last date, but now they want the financial statement draft much in advance to the board meeting. So your finance team has to be very alert. There was a taxation treatment you were doing a certain way, now you want to change that treatment, and your auditors are also okay with it, but now you have to explain the investor that why, how, what is the impact. So these dynamics completely change when from a yes man and an inside company, from whatever you do is an internal discussion, now becomes an external matter and an approval matter at every stage.
Let's make it a little more complicated now. Instead of one investor, you have a string of investors, all of them coming from different, VCs/Ps, as the case might be. What happens at that time? How does this obligation suddenly become exponentially more complex?
It becomes complex more because now there may be an Indian investor and an international investor. Now expectations completely change. Indian wants to see something you're doing under Companies Act. Foreign investor wants to see an international level of compliance you're doing. So they may ask you something around that also. Plus, international investors always want to appoint an observer to the board. Indian investors may sell a nominee director to the board. So now your board is also very complicated. They will ask you difficult questions. They will ask estimation to everything. So that's how more than one investor has more than one problem now, because their rights can also be pretty much different. And now when you are asking one investor approval to hold your board meeting, now you have to go to two investors, and one may be okay, but the other may not be okay with it. So explaining to different set of people the same thing, but to their convenience and comfort, and to get a consent, again becomes another big challenge. And that's the hurdle which is mostly to be solved by the compliance officer, because now I am the face of it. And that's the problem, because when you are the face of it, you have to be very convincing and very challenging. This job is very challenging when it comes to explaining the investors, because maybe you can explain ROC or SEBI, but explaining investors is more difficult. That's what I feel. Because there's no format. No, there is no base or format where they will, agree to it. It's all about, giving the good documentation. Your formats in which you are sending, the details and documents which you are sending should be so detailed and so perfect. And you have to have that ability to predict what questions can come, and beforehand only include that in the details. This is how you can achieve a smoother consent from the investors.
Very interesting. Now, tell me one thing. Most founders, they have no clue of all the details that you just explained. Our education system, unfortunately, doesn't teach some of this. I mean, I went to an IIM Calcutta, but there was no course on any of this. So we all end up learning on the ground with real life experience. How do you think founders should become more aware of these obligations so that they are not flying blind? Are there ways to get this education, this sensitization, awareness, procedural items, compliance items, so that while they are busy transforming their customers and their financials, they are not blindsided to this very critical part of growth management?
What my suggestion would be, and what I have also seen, that founders should be more receptive towards what their team is telling them, and more vigilant about the changing compliance environment in India. And nowadays there's so much available to study, to read, to discuss externally and internally. Your compliance team is sitting right there. So what traditionally founders were doing was spending much time with the product team, the tech team, the manufacturing unit. So what I would say that they should start, blocking their calendar and spending more time with the compliance and finance team, where they can first hand get the information of the ideas they have and how it can be executed and how it can be within the framework of regulations. Plus also keep them very much updated about what's going on in market, what kind of rejection approvals are.
I think, Upasana, your assumption is that founders already have the right people around them and they have a right team. In fact, I work with a number of founders in my community. Most of them do not even appreciate the importance of this role. चलता है, होता है, जब देखा जाएगा तब करेंगे. Sort of a tone is a very dominant tone. I mean, I want you to spend a minute and let founders know that if they are genuinely thinking of moving from a young startup to an institution at some point, which has public ownership in it, which has institutional ownership in it, that thinking doesn't happen when you get to that tipping point. That thinking has to start many years ahead of time, so you don't end up creating a compliance debt.
So in this case, the founders have to understand one thing, that running and doing things at last moment will not be possible. So compliance governance is not a sprint. They have to start it and make it a part of culture and as a habit from the beginning of the company early days. Because what is happening is, when we try to complete the due diligence or IPO journey at last moment, what we are doing is just checking the history of company like a disease and checking the symptoms and then treating it. Instead of that, we should do a very early stage internal due diligence and understand that we need to cure the disease itself instead of waiting for a symptom of that this has happened in backdate. Because to all those founders that see, backdated document may or may not be completed, but the backdated trust you will never achieve. So building an early habit of compliance will always save you from a rush at the end of funding rounds. The rush that is created in havoc on 5-6 months when you are running down everything and now, stitching what is already went wrong. So instead of that, creating a mindset that, I want to run this company, but I want to run it without any compliance risk. So as you all understand the risk of a product falling, customer not coming, everything around business. So treat compliance as a feature of business and not a cost center. So once you feel that it is one of the sections of business, then they will start cultivating the habit of culture in the beginning of the years. And I would say the founders I have seen who have done this have really achieved good listing, and at the end of the IPO filing, it was much painless to file a DRHP than those who have not done it in early stage. So for this, I think it's more of, I would say that founders should inculcate this habit of culture when they even seed an idea of creating a startup. And if they know this beforehand, then they will be safe from a lot of pain which happens at the filing of funding or IPO rounds.
Great. Now let's switch gears a little bit. Let's assume that the founders are doing really well. There's traction for their products and services in the marketplace, and they finally decided to, offer their shares to the public via an IPO mode. How should one think about it? When does this planning begin? How far in advance one has to start thinking about? Now imagine most Indian founders are not very in tune with compliance, and there may be a lot of non-compliances which may have to be remediated before the actual regulatory scrutiny starts. Walk us through this whole process.
So I think IPO is not a 1 month, 6 month process. At least 18 to 24 months ahead you have to think. If you want to go public at any stage, so you should start thinking about it from the first funding round you received. That time, because you're anyways going through a due diligence process. Now also you have the time to break that chain of not a very good compliant company to be a perfectly compliant company, because this is the time you think about going for an IPO. So start taking those 24-18 months to retrospectively check the documents and avoid any mistake which you were doing or you may do in future before the IPO comes. So that
if I have to dissect this further, double click this, imagine well-meaning founders started this journey 24 months ago. How should they go about it? Should they hire a consultant? Should they hire a senior company secretary or a compliance professional who has seen this journey, seen this movie many times before, who has a trained pair of eyes? Because a normal company secretary may not have the nuanced understanding of this IPO journey. What should they do?
The first and foremost step to the IPO journey is to hire a company secretary with ample amount of experience in this. At least a middle level experience, at least they should hire it on board. First thing in their mind should be a company secretary who has seen the IPO journey, who has seen a transformation of a small company to IPO to a listed company. because they have the eye for everything, that what may have went wrong, what I need to check. Because a person who's coming with even a listed experience will not even know that these are the problems are which can come in a startup company. So first thing is the startup, the company secretary journey. Second thing is to build a compliance team. Maybe it's the CFO, maybe
that's what I was going to ask, that just company secretary is not going to be able to pull all the weight for you.
So you have to have a CFO in place, because finance is anyway a backbone of the company. So many small companies don't have a CFO. They usually go with the VP or director finance and continue with that, and realizes very later when there's a CFO requirement under the listing regulation. So the CFO role also has to kick in very early, because he will think about the financial model as no one has thought before. So the CFO CS roles, even if the CS has a legal head, that's fine. Otherwise, you have to have a legal person in place. These three roles are the key role in an IPO journey. This is the first thing you do. After that, you should have
forming the right team, which should have a seasoned company secretary who has seen this movie many times before, a CFO who fully understands the financials, the taxation, the model, and so on and so forth. And the third person, in case company secretary doesn't come with the extensive legal experience, you need a general counsel equivalent position as well.
Sure.
So this is your tag team.
This is your main team. This will be the leader team for your IPO journey. The second
what
thing
next? So you have a team now. How should you approach this whole journey? Should you hire third-party consultants who do these audits? Should you take a digital tool or solution to start tracking these items? Should you identify, diagnose non-compliances and start remediating? What should this journey look like?
So this journey should parallelly go in all three directions. The internal team should start their internal due diligence and do whatever they come across as a non-compliance or as a missed compliance. And process improvement, more importantly, because this is internal team. If it was not done, can be dissected by any external party. But what is to be done in the next 24-18 months? So they should establish actual internal financial control, internal secretarial control processes, a very formal way of doing these board meetings and approval process, and a due diligence of what have happened in the past years. The internal team should internalize all these things. Plus, if the company they can hire an external person with an external eye to do this due diligence. And most importantly, this is the phase where if the company is not very tech savvy, they should start use of technology in this compliance journey also. If you get a compliance tool on board, a compliance audit on board, that they have to do. Because externally in this 12-18 months, it's all about evidencing what you have done correctly. And a tech evidence is the most valuable evidence and most dependable evidence, with the external party will believe into it. So once you get on board for
get a tech product, put all your evidences there, make sure it has an audit trail around it. There is a single source of truth for every compliance obligation. So when regulators are scrutinizing some of your evidences, they can actually see a simple enough trail of these evidences, demonstrable in an institutionalized manner over a period of time. Is that how they should think about it?
Yes, because this makes the journey of the company very easy, and also in the public eye, in the investor eye, in the government regulators eye. The company using such technology itself is a proof that they're so serious about their governance. So they have to have this three-way approach, that hire an internal team, maybe hire an external consultant, do your internalization and external check, but side by side you start using technology to track everything.
So you're saying that technology offers a signaling value to the regulators as well as to investors that you're serious about governance.
Yes. So in my experience, I've seen that when you are a fairly small company, and when an external investor comes and sees ki, wow, your reports are automated, and you have a tool in place, and maybe a market famous tool which they are also using. So it's something you have on board, and a very big company they don't have on board, they are very impressed with this fact. So your half war is win when they see you from a good governance company eye.
Excellent. Now, let's talk labor for a few minutes. Any company who's trying to go for an IPO, chances are they have a sizable human footprint across different states and different locations in the country. And from our labor law experience, we clearly recognize that every state can have anywhere between 80 to 120 forms and formats in the erstwhile labor laws, which are now being substituted with labor codes. there are about 17 or 18 key acts that are applicable. Among them, there are about 50 to 60 different regulatory registers and returns that have to be maintained. A lot of nuancing is there in calculations and so on and so forth, and national festival holidays and overtime and this and that. Just to stay on the right side of the law with labor laws, what is your recommendation? Should companies think of hiring a labor law consultant and getting them to do a comprehensive audit? A lot of entrepreneurs, I realize, don't even understand that contractor obligations become their obligations if contractor fails to fulfill their liabilities, and suddenly this becomes a provision P&L item on your books.
So I am very much in favor of this, that you should have an external help in this case, because labor law is such a thing in India that even after these codes, there are too many compliances. Every state has something different. There's something city specific, state specific, and no one practically can inside the company can execute and have knowledge of all these things. So though you have a technology tool in place to tell you what is happening and have you done it, side by side you should have an external consultant who can physically actually go to Labor Commission's office and try to find out things which your company need to comply, because this is a very physical process till now. These websites and offices are still not very tech savvy and online, unlike our NSC, BSc and ROC. So this is a field they completely lack tech support, and too much listening and too much visits to offices required. So this is a field the companies who are operating in more than one city and have a vision to expand physically, geographically, should always have a labor law expert in place. We will tell you what is wrong, what is right, because the penalties are huge, and the worst part in this is that this becomes your qualification item in your balance sheet, and if you're going for a DD, if you're going for an IPO, this will hit you. It will be part of your offer document. So better late than never. Still, if they have time, they should just start hiring a consultant, meeting them regularly, even internalize. If your HR team is equipped enough, they can also internalize and read every materials available. But external help is very much required in labor law field.
Now, assume that the company went through this whole journey. A lot of non-compliances were detected and diagnosed during audits. Many of them got successfully remediated. You filed the prospectus, went through the whole IPO, went and rang the bell at the exchange and so on. And now flip over to the listed side of the world. Suddenly the responsibilities change. What you can say to press, when you can say to press, what kind of information can you reveal, under what conditions, what you can trade versus not, the blackout windows. Tell us a little bit about how this journey changes when you are on the other side.
So this journey actually starts changing only when you file your DRHP. So this journey starts then and there when PIT regulation is anyway applicable to you. The data entries of sharing data is you have to maintain.
You want to tell people about the PID? Many of them don't know the acronym.
Prohibition of insider trading regulations in India are also applicable on the companies who are going for an IPO, who are proposing to issue an IPO. So this journey starts few months before you finalize your offer document, 3-4 months before. From that date only, and you're obviously, when your document is filed with SEBI, you cannot talk to press media and you cannot advertise about the company. So this journey starts then and there when you become serious of how you're reacting in market, what your employees, senior employees are going in telling in market.
What does a senior employee mean for the purpose of this discussion?
Senior employee means the senior personal management of the company as per SEBI LODR, which means the person basically reporting to the MD or founder directly. So the cream layer, which we loosely call leadership or your core team, they have to be very responsible. The compliance officer, CFO also has to be very responsible of what you talk. So whole advertising branding guidelines are now applicable on you. Maybe you are saying big numbers in public just to promote your product. But now when you are in a sales pitch also, we tell our sales team also, you can say this and you cannot say this. You cannot give any futuristic statement that in 1 year I'll be the 1,000 crore company and all. So you have to be very careful of what you're talking in public. With respect to share dealing also, now when
you mentioned a word called SEBI LODR. Many of our audience may not be fully aware. Do you want to spend a minute or two talk about that?
So once you are listed, so SEBI listing regulations are available, are applicable on you, and these regulations are the thing which listed company has to follow. And it's a plethora a box which blows out of, and you'll realize, oh, these things which we're doing normally are now everything under regulatory compliance, and now you are under constant check from the regulators that what you released in public, what you said, and did you inform to the stock exchange or public at large before you inform to someone outside the company. So these two regulations are draconian in nature, and you have to be very careful while dealing with it. So your employees, you have given so many ESOPs, now want to obviously sell when you are listed, and they're so excited to finally earn some money out of it. But now then you have a thing called trading window closures, that when your market, your team may know something which is not in public, so you will tell them that you cannot trade shares when these times are available, and you cannot trade shares when you have some information which is not in public. So this whole compliance journey externally is anyways what we see, but internally is very difficult, because making 500 600 employees sit and explain that you cannot talk in public, with so much Instagram and Twitter and social media, LinkedIn, you cannot post this in public.
You say that because before the listing and the RHP and so on and so forth, most founders are salespeople, right? They enjoy making bombastic statements. They project growth many times over, and that is a natural habit. And the moment you go through that process, suddenly you have to watch what you say, where you say. You're going out for a drink with a bunch of friends in the evening. You can't casually utter stuff, because somebody could be using this information to make buy or sell decisions on stocks, and suddenly you could be a problem area there. Tell us a little bit about how PR changes, how interactions with the press have to be measured, calibrated, what information you are disclosing. Why is it so important from a regulator point of view? Is it just a tyrannical way of governing them, or is there a business thinking behind oopsie, which is something I'll have you explain to our audience?
So what happens when you are having public money? Then you are owned by public technically, and you are responsible towards them. So any unpublished by sensitive information, like any release of the product or such information which will affect the share market price, will affect the valuation of those shareholders. So now it's a responsibility on you that nobody should have an advantage of getting an income out of your shares, which the normal shareholders are not getting, the public is not getting. That's why these regulations are in place, which is fair. But to actually comply to this becomes difficult, because the founders, as I said, have so much presence on social media. They want to write so much on their LinkedIn profile. They want to share something in a party, maybe in a office party, and they want to announce something around the employees in their annual function. And if you have seen that many new startups have this very good advertising department also. They release some AI videos, and a lot of things they say on that. They may have an April Fool video going around. So this now becomes a social responsibility on the company, that you cannot give statements which are not public. You cannot do false statements and a joke around like this, even to creating an image which will hurt the share price. So as you said, they're drinking, saying something, or even posting photos on social media becomes a problem, because everything is a rumor, and because of even if a rumor, your share price is going up and down, you have to give an explanation to SEBI. So stock exchanges. So you are socially and responsibly to the shareholders, because they have invested in you. So it's a responsibility you carry. Now you cannot be casual and cannot be too excited about releasing things which you are not telling the regulators. You have public money. You cannot, avoid that. So easy way to do a solution to it is that we as compliance team always sit with the PR team, with the HR team, to release these statements that where you can use company branding, what statements you can say out loud. And if you're launching something which can affect the price, the revenue, then you have to let's release to the stock exchange and not take risk on the compliance side of it.
We had identified that 38% of compliances carry clauses for imprisonment, many of them applicable to board members and KMPs and so on and so forth as well. So a lot of board members, particularly independent directors, feel a little anxious when they come on board. The nature of dialogues, the kind of questions change. They ask for data to whomsoever it may concern. We are in compliance with the law of the land, doesn't quite cut ice with them. So what do you think? How does that world change when independent directors come in?
So when independent directors come in, two things they bring with themselves is one is the outside perspective. So till the time the independent directors are there on board, not on board. So what we think is we are the best. We are doing the best work. There's no one to ask question. There are yes men everywhere. But once they are in the picture, they come and tell us you the outside perspective, how they view the company, how the market is doing. They also tell us what are the norms going around, what is their expectation, and they come with the willingness to say no, to ask difficult questions, to push back whatever you do. So independent directors truly bring independence on the board. That is what they serve. That's a good thing for the company, because till the time they are not there, things are not very detailed. A true made board pack is read by them. They ask you the right set of questions, you reply to them, and you also in turn learn that where you are lagging and what best you can do. And also they bring with them a lot of good positive fame for the company when you tell them that these investors or the IPO, after the IPO, that these are my board members. So that also brings a credibility on the board that okay, this company must be doing some governance right, that these people are on the board of the company. Also they bring the expertise. So a good combination would be like you must have a finance person on the independent director. They can head the audit committee. You can bring the industry expert to be independent director in whichever you are operating. So with the skill set, with the knowledge, they also bring the expertise, they bring the contacts, they bring a perspective to it, which changes the journey of the company completely. So this is a very positive thing for the company.
How do they look at compliance? Does the rigor change? Does the record keeping and assurance-based, risk-based approach to compliance change?
They want to see a company perfectly compliant. What I said, 100% compliant. They want to see. So they change the way the way we look at the compliance. So even if there were directors or founders who were not very willing to do compliance, but once the independent directors on board, then the seriousness becomes double. Everything is documented. Your board agenda papers become rigorously detailed and everything is done. Your board meetings become a 2-3 hour long sessions. Apart from them, even the business you are doing becomes a detailed explanation to them that what are we doing, what are we planning, what was the revenue numbers, how we are planning to grow, why this expenses increase. So that kind of difficult questions they are asking. So they bring a true governance perspective in the company, in the management team especially. Okay, then there are difficult questions, then everyone becomes very serious about the compliance issue. And then obviously when you're signing documents, you're taking their signatures, they ask tough questions. And then you prepare yourself for that tough question. So governance go from this level to this level when they are on board. And this truly helps the company in long run. There is no doubt about it.
We are getting to the end of this dialogue. One last thing before we wrap up. I want you to tell our audience about Reg 30. What kind of obligations come under the Regulation 30 of the SEBI Act? And why is it so important? And how does this change the public perception of maturity of governance for the company and may inadvertently end up affecting the valuation of the company and its market cap?
So Regulation 30 is a regulation under SEBI listing regulations, which specifically has a laundry list of compliance of actions which a company is doing or events which are happening in company, and you have to in advance or doing that action within 30 minutes, within 4 hours, you have to inform the stock exchange about that. So things like you are doing an acquisition or you're going for a merger, demerger, such type of big events in the company. So the regulator expect that you will first tell the regulators, make that thing public, and then only you do an action about it. So any such things, your financial results are coming out, your senior management is changing, your company secretary is leaving, or you're hiring someone, your directors are changing. Such big events of the company which will have impact on the share price. So regulator is expecting you to inform them pre-hand. In fact, to that extent that if you are a company which takes up contract or wins a tender, so that kind of things also, if you won a big tender, you have to inform to the regulators. The regulators have went to the extent that they have made a whole schedule that if you don't inform, what will be the penalty category wise of the things you have not informed. This is done by the regulators to actually ensure that the shareholders, when holding your shares and other shareholders investing in you, make a sound decision about your valuation when they are going into, they are spending money or investing in you. So these are very important items, and it's a laundry list. So sometimes what happens is when you're going in a board meeting, sending this item, there are people who forget to actually report to the exchange or not make a full disclosure out of what items they want to exchange. Simple things like capital restructuring. So you may say, oh, this item is not sounding like a restructure. We are just, some shareholders just selling some shares, some doing some block deal, but they can be. So Regulation 30 always comes to bite bad because the vigilance department of stock exchange is very alert. So you put in that, you click the button of submit, and if you have done something wrong, hardly I think it takes 3 to 4 hours, and if you're doing it in evening, next morning you get a mail from the stock exchange. So even if you're meeting some investors, that is also you have to inform pre-hand that you're meeting with the investors, because that may potentially impact the how market is seeing. You're meeting some big investor, and obviously market will have a very positive impact of it. So you have to tell them that we'll go to meet this, and then after meeting you have to inform that I have met them. So this compliance, they are monitoring to that level that if you have submitted 1 hour late from the timeline, you get an email from NSE/BSE in the morning that this was submitted late. So they are very serious about it, and a company who's going to get listed, or every newly listed company, should consider having this readily available list of Regulation 30 items. Your team should be sensitized enough, and to the founder's perspective, the compliance officer should reach out to the founder and give them that list and always explain them the impact of it, because the penalties are huge, and more than the monetary penalty, it's the penalty of a negative market image. If you get a notice, from stock exchange, or a penalty is levied by SEBI, then it will create a very negative brand image.
Can you also talk about reporting fines and penalties because of non-compliance to be reported based on materiality clause to the regulator?
Yes, so any maybe you receive a tax notice if you have done assessment notice, and you have to file that. You have to tell under Regulation 30 to a stock exchange, I have received this notice or demand from tax authorities. If you have been levied a penalty, maybe from Competition Commission, advertising guidelines, and you have to inform. So these things also matter. So I think there's a very famous case of Zomato when they have received a huge tax demand when they had reported to a stock exchange, and even to this end it was not still proved. It's just an assessment, but the whole way you have to go and report. There's a lot of discussion in tax team about this, that what has to be reported and what not has to be reported. So any penalty you receive out of maybe labor office, a small penalty, like you have filed a delayed PF and you forgot to do something, and then you receive a notice from the labor authorities, this will come on your page of stock exchange, your company, in your company's name. And because of the new era of social media, this will become a news next day morning. Even to the extent that one of your senior employees traded in shares when they had some price sensitive information. Now this becomes a news next day, and you will see, if you Google, you will see these news are every day someone traded, there's some penalty, and the company has to bear this price of non-compliance, maybe when the company was genuinely not at fault also. So it's a lot of cost of non-compliance, a risk which company faces. So we have to pre-hand always try our level best to assess what can come, what cannot come, and in our ability we should try to be 100% compliance. Compliance is the only field, you can achieve 80% of revenue, 90% of sales target, but in compliance it has to be 100%. It's no 99.99% in this field. So, and to company secretaries also, I would say, if this is the closing note, that think more than Companies Act and SEBI LODR. This word is changing with AI into picture, with so much technology development. We cannot say मेरा काम नहीं है, मुझे नहीं पता. Even if you're not leading the legal department, you have to be very well aware of all the laws, because you are the head of all applicable laws and you are certifying that with the MD. So you have to think beyond your role as a company secretary. And if you want to be the strategic partners, if you want founders to trust you, and you want to support the journey of a company and not only a compliance journey as an overall, So you should start building a habit of thinking more than what you have studied in your course. Think about AI, do something in it, think about technology, think about labor law, POSH, go more ahead in the venues, think about the product. What I even talk when I attend sessions for ICSI as a speaker, that this is the time that you all have to read about business. Now this is not time you cannot say कि मुझे business नहीं आता. You are a company secretary, you are sitting in the board meetings, you are listening to every discussion, every answers management is giving to the independent directors, every question raised, asked. So first hand in the induction, every company secretary should get deep down into the understanding of business. Then only you will able to support the compliance. If you are a business, maybe if you are a manufacturing company, so you have to think about the Factories Act. You have to think on what product they're making, glass, gas, coal. Then your sphere of understanding and section increases. So for any role nowadays, there is no limitation of learning. Everything is available. And I would say these founders companies are very supportive also. If you show interest, there will be other departments supporting you. Even they'll teach you coding if you want. So let's...
Very beautifully said. Not just company secretaries need to learn, or compliance officers need to learn business. I would say even founders need to learn compliance, because you can't just outsource it to a third party and just hope that everything will be hunky-dory. A lot of founders are quick learners. They are like sponges. Once they put their mind to something, they can absorb things really quickly. And my issue there is a lot of founders think compliance unke liye nahi hai. It's a roadblock, it's a showstopper, it's a support function. It does not deserve their time and attention. Whereas I would like to say, this is going to become a binding constraint in your dream, from running a small mom and pop store to building an institution where the world is investing in it. So one has to be very aware of this. Roles and responsibilities change during the life cycle. When you are a survivalist oriented company, the obligations and opportunities and challenges are of a different nature. You can get by with a lot of stuff. You're so small, the world doesn't really care about your existence. But as you start growing, as you start attracting institutional capital, the level of accountability grows at various stages. And once you become public and the ownership is with the end public, the responsibilities are like never before. What you say, where you say, how much do you share, whether it was shared with public at large in a unified manner, or some people had privileged information. A lot of those things come under scrutiny, and government is becoming savvy, regulators are becoming savvy, technology is omnipresent. You would not believe exchanges have access to so many feeds and so many different kinds of information. There's a lot of AI, contrary to what one might think, which is at play there. A non-compliance of any kind can get detected, diagnosed, notices get issued, and within no time, under various regulations, including Reg 30, which Upasana spoke about, some of this gets into the glaring public scrutiny before you realize, and a lot of that creates a long-term positive or negative perception depending on what is the nature of the news on the company's attractiveness for the shareholders. And as you know, there's a premium typically the market places on well-governed companies and a discount on poorly governed companies. And I think, as founders, you know better where you would like to be. So Upasana, thank you so much. Really enjoyed our conversation. This is a topic that comes up in our startup communities on and off. And a lot of founders who are great disruptors, but poor administrators, it's hopefully a wake-up call for them. And hopefully you've given them some glide path to building an institution that is sustainable, that is lasting, and that can help them take their infant all the way to becoming a world-class institution. Thank you so much. Really appreciate your time.